Over the last few seasons, if Barcelona weren't playing for a whole week, it usually meant that either it was an international break and maybe a player was going to get injured because they were playing anyway, or Barcelona had been knocked out of some kind of competition, so they had to watch on the sidelines. But this week was not that week. In fact, Kool-Aids got to put their feet up, rest their heads back, and enjoy some chaos in the Champions League that Barcelona didn't have to take part in. While watching Real Madrid on Tuesday beat Man City the way they did was not ideal for Kool-Aids, I did appreciate everybody that joined me in the watch along on Big Up, and I do hope that even more of you join me on the watch along on Monday for that game against Rayo Vallecano. But before we have to worry about another game on Monday, I want to welcome you to episode 659 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton. I'm wearing the OG vintage stuff that went out to my original Patreons way back in 2017, 2018. So yeah, the early days of the podcast, the shirt still fits somehow, which is great to see. But if you want to be like them and be big supporters of the podcast, of course, the Patreon is the best and the easiest and most direct way to do that. You also get a shout out on the show for being a top tier Patreon. You can also subscribe on YouTube, like and leave a comment to feed the almighty algorithm. And of course, follow me anywhere on social media. All right, let's dive in now. The top 5 pieces of news from this week. The first piece of news is basically the forward buzz in the rumor mill, because yes, while the January transfer window just ended, Lewandowski isn't getting any younger, and I think Barcelona need to always have an eye on the future. Because even with the other names that we're going to talk about in a second, this news about the forward line for Barcelona, and particularly the number 9 position, begins and ends this week with Lewandowski. It appears that the club didn't just let the option in his contract do the work of renewing him for another season, but the board went ahead, instead of having that, I'd say, hang over the player. Not that it was, because he was definitely going to play for more than half of the games. With Hansi Flick's apparent suggestion, they got this deal to extend him done early. The option was that his contract would renew automatically for another year if he played in at least half of the matches, which again is obviously going to have happened, but he'll be returning no matter what next season, with no reported option for an additional season. So the club just went ahead and took that option instead of waiting for that clause to happen naturally over the course of the season. What that does tell me, though, is that the club is either looking to spend huge on his quote-unquote replacement this summer or next. That seems to be a guarantee, because if the board had gone ahead with this option and they had extended him an additional year because of the goals he's scoring this season, well, then they would have done that. And because they didn't do that, I really don't think that an additional year is going to be tacked on. The player might not want that either. I also find it interesting that the same day that the Lewandowski stuff about his contract is a buzz, it's also Vitor Roque's camp coming out and denying that the Brazilian forward is looking for a permanent transfer to Palmeiras in the Brazilian transfer window, which doesn't run at the same time as Europe. I will use this time now as a reminder that he is still 19 for 2 more weeks before we say that he'll never be this or never be that. He has 7 goals and 30 appearances for Real Betis, which on the surface doesn't look great, but the fact that he's a striker under 20 that has started in over half of his games for a top half of Liga side, those are all good signs for his future. The goals are the hardest thing to do, though. That's true. But with these young forwards, it's always good to be patient. And these big clubs, like Barcelona, you can get bit by going too early for these players. The tough thing for Vitor Roque, though, is that he could still reach his potential. But as I just told you with that timeline, I'm worried that it's probably not going to be at Barcelona, and it might be at another club. Will he have to go all the way back to Brazil, to Palmeiras, to get comfortable again? Maybe, maybe not. But if he is returning to Brazil, or if there is some kind of truth to those rumors, but that does tell you that maybe, like many Brazilians who make the jump to Europe at such a young age, being teenagers, sometimes that move halfway across the world can be a bit too much on a personal level, and it does affect what happens on the field. So far, I've been happy with Vitor Roque has done on the field. And he's been pretty honest about the struggles he had when he moved to Barcelona and what it was about being in Europe for the first time and the huge nature and pressure of a club like Barcelona. So I just hope Vitor Roque can get more comfortable and continue to work through his journey as a player in a different world, as well as on the field. And then another maybe coincidence with the Lewandowski news, but friend of the show, Tony Juan Martí from Siempre Positivo, reported that Barcelona likes all of Alexander Isak from Newcastle, Luis Diaz from Liverpool, and Benjamin Sesko from RB Leipzig, which for those 3 names, I say, yeah, Barcelona, of course, get in line. Who doesn't? Who wouldn't want those 3 players? Barca better be back to the 1-to-1, though, because those names in particular, if there is truth to it, they will all command huge numbers in the transfer market. The kind of potentially 9-figure deal, that 100 million mark that you don't see happen, but you buy goals. Goals are the most expensive thing in football today. It also seems like a bad idea in hindsight for one player, though, in Barcelona's market or any market to spend 100 million anymore on a player, but clubs are still doing that. Sesko is a 21-year-old Slovenian who has 15 goals in 30 matches this season. That's not a bad rate at all for where he is in his career. He has a really tall, empowering frame, but he does a little bit more than just the big boy forward stuff that you'd expect, and he certainly has sky-high potential. Isak, meanwhile, is a 25-year-old with 17 Prem goals this season, finally becoming the player and realizing the player that I think many called for him to be when he was first popping up with Real Sociedad in the Liga a few years ago as a young player in his early 20s. And now he's his mid-20s. He's found that scoring touch that he didn't have before. And all those other things that make him such a well-rounded and difficult forward to defend, his drop-in play, his link-up stuff, that's still part of his game. And that's what's made him so dangerous in the Premier League. He has the versatility to play with a target striker like a Lewandowski or as the number 9 himself, so in the post-Lewandowski era. And finally, as I said, that goal-scoring consistency for many to think that it's time he landed in a Champions League contending team. That might be now, and apologies to Newcastle, because you're not really a Champions League contending team just yet. Let me know, please, in the comments or hit me up on social media if you're listening to this, what your best hot takes are and what Barcelona should do with that number 9 position. The reason I didn't mention Luis Diaz is, this is my personal opinion, while I think he would be a great addition to that left wing, sure, between Rafinha and Lamine Yamal and some of the other players I've mentioned over and over again coming to the academy, plus the sheer number of 10s that Barcelona has at Hansi Flick's disposal for the next 2 to 3 seasons, I just don't think that Luis Diaz is necessarily the profile that Barcelona should be going for. Our second piece of news from this week comes in yesterday about Cubarsi's renewal, very much like I spoke about with Pedri and Gabi last week, as Barcelona got those deals done right as the transfer window was ending. Getting Cubarsi's renewal all done and dusted, put to paper, that's going to help out in the summertime, knowing that you have players like Pedri, Gabi, and Cubarsi locked in for the long term, and you know what those numbers are going to be for at least the next 3 to 4 seasons. That help you understand the money that you're going to have to work with those all locked up. By locking up the 18-year-old Cubarsi until 2029, it helps solidify your core for the future. I've said that before, that even if you have other injuries along that back line, you don't have to worry about him going anywhere in the offseason. I did speak about how special Cubarsi is last month on the top 5 when he turned 18, so you can check that out to hear me gushing about the special talent with the numbers, or just tune into any watch-along. I talk about how great Cubarsi is on every single one of those. I can't tell you how good Cubarsi is and will be, but I think you already know that if you're watching this at this point, because while the defensive stuff is improving, there is no ceiling on the offensive side of the ball. And even if he's just as good as he is right now defensively at that aspect of the game, you start that kid and eventually a man, you start that man every single match as long as he's fit, especially for the big games. For the defensive stuff, we can be a bit critical of him as an 18-year-old and hope that he continues to improve on that end, but it's also not bad at all. I would say he's an average to above average defender at this point already in his career. And after Pedri, Gabi, and Cubarsi are now locked up for the long-term future, Lamine Yamal, he's the next one on the list. Because even of that 4, Lamine Yamal, that is the wage bill number that I'm most anxious about. He can command a lot of money, especially with Jorge Mendes as his agent. So it'd be interesting to see what number both parties land on. We know that Lamine Yamal will be extending at Barcelona. It's just how much of the salary cap in the future will he command? My guess is for next season, because you could always extend him and renew him again in the future. As a 17-year-old, if he signs his contract on his 18th birthday or somewhere around there, my guess is that the yearly wage will be around 14, which as far as 2 years from now would then put him as a top 2 to 3 earner for the club. But we'll have to see. That would just be my prediction based on how important he is and how the club knows how important he is. Our third piece of news this week is that Atletico Madrid awaits in the Copa del Rey. The draw did come out, and while Barcelona have already won the Spanish Super Cup, of course, Hansi Flick and Culés would love to see as many trophies as possible. And now, with the semifinals in a few short weeks, they are just 3 wins away, or I guess I could say that better as 2 wins and then a reasonable third result away from another Copa del Rey, the trophy that they have won more than any other club in Spain. On the other side of the bracket is Real Sociedad and Real Madrid, but before Barcelona can worry about one of those two, they have to get through Atletico Madrid, a team that they'll now meet 3 more times this season, and also based on the La Liga standings, all 3 of those matchups are huge games, and Bojan Krkic said as much in an interview yesterday. It is a 2-legged matchup, with the first leg the last week of February and the second leg the first week of April. The final will be in Seville at La Cartuja, which is not the home stadium for Sevilla or Real Betis. Not that that matters for the final, since neither will be there. But anyway, that will happen on April the 26th, so before the Champions League final is anywhere near in sight either. Before we even talk about the Copa del Rey final, Barcelona has to survive an Atleti side that finished top 8 in the Champions League phase and are still a point ahead in the Liga standings, as I said, and looking pretty good, looking pretty solid, and playing well in Diego Simeone at the moment. Remember, Atleti was the last team to deal Barcelona a loss, the 2-1 winner in stoppage time right before Christmas. But I want to be positive, and we can leave that loss in 2024 because Barcelona have not been beaten yet in 2025. So let's be a bit more positive. Our fourth piece of news is moving on in UEFA Youth League because talking about knockout competitions, there was a Barcelona team that had to do some winning in a knockout competition this week, and that was the Barcelona U19s led by Giuliano Belletti, who is moving on to the last 16 after beating Dinamo Zagreb on penalties. The two were tied 2-2 after full time, but without extra time and skipping right to the penalties, Barcelona needed a Diego Cochen save, which they got, to punch their ticket to the next round. They also converted all their PKs, that leave no doubt. Set-piece defending was a concern. They looked like a young team, but they looked like a young team that were even younger than Dinamo Zagreb, which they were, but Barcelona fell behind twice in that way on set pieces. But I came away from the match more positive than negative, for sure. So I'm just saying the negative up front. Barcelona generally controlled the match, and my standouts from that game were definitely Xavi Esbar playing right back instead of midfielder. He's a player that I thought was in like that next tier, the tier after, in terms of maybe making the first team. He reminds me a lot of Sergio Roberto, honestly, with his versatility and just the way that he reads the game really well. But I don't know what he does at an elite level for the top level, but I do like the consistency in which he plays in multiple positions. Hugo Alba, who I haven't profiled yet as a top center forward talent, he is scoring a ton of goals this year. And when goal scorers just scoring goals, maybe it's time to give them more attention. I thought that Landry Ferre and Pedro Rodriguez, both players I think have huge potential. They were both solid as I expected. And Kim Junet, I think he struggled to make a huge impact on the game, but I still very much believe in him. And Diego Cochen, as I already mentioned, he was huge when he needed to be. The standout player, though, in the match was Jan Virgili, who I remind you arrived in the summer from Gymnastique. He's a dribbly left winger, and while the decision-making is still a work in progress for him, his aggression and skill were on display. 5 key passes for the 18-year-old. They highlighted some positive stats, but the eye test, even for me watching that, was what told you how important he was and could be in the future. With Dani Rodriguez out for another few weeks now, unlike the 10 or right wing spots, left wing is a place on the field where La Masia could still use a few more names. Remember, even if a player is a top prospect at the U16 level, U18, the U19 level even, getting to the first team and continuing to stay healthy and have your career go in a linear positive way, it's really, really hard. So this is nothing against Dani Rodriguez. I thought he was good enough to be in the first team, at least the dynamics of the Copa del Rey or something like that, before he got hurt again for these last 10 weeks. And this has just been injury-plagued season for him, unfortunately. And then our fifth piece of news is about the Mapi Leon controversy. This is not a good story. I don't know if you missed this or if you're paying attention to it, but if you're not here for negativity, maybe this is the time you tune out. But this is unfortunately one where I have to not take the side of the Barcelona player. And I have done that a few times over the years. You don't have to dogmatically defend your players if they do something wrong. But the club and her teammates have. So let's talk about what happened. The Barca defender was accused of inappropriate touching of Espanyol's Daniela Caracas during their match last week. The video clearly shows her make inappropriate contact with Caracas, but Mapi Leon and FC Barcelona, as I said, have absolved her of wrongdoing with statements, with teammates and the club expressing her innocence. While I do think on the men's side of the game, this would be a much more straightforward conversation, this is a tough situation because primarily how women are spoken about online, it makes it so much worse. It's that Mapi Leon, instead of being able to go with an apology or whatever it was or take accountability, there's already an outsized amount of vitriol being spit at her. And then the person who was on the receiving end of this in Caracas has also gotten a ton of online backlash and terrible treatment just for speaking out about this. As any black athlete, by the way, can likely attest to, the racism in Spain is nothing new, and the response that Caracas has gotten is not surprising to me, unfortunately. The disappointing part of this whole story is that Mapi Leon, a player that I really, really enjoy and has done wonderful things for the LGBTQ plus community, being on the other side of this controversy, that's the part that bums me out. She's a player that has done so much work on the field as well as a defender and a winner to promote women's football in so many positive ways, especially in Spain. So the fallout from this, I think, is the biggest part of the story, where rumors of racist and transphobic language and accusations are still circulating, and the story will likely put a magnifying glass on Mapi Leon for the rest of her career. I watched the video and I was really disappointed with what I saw because I wanted to make sure that my eyes confirmed instead of just reading something online. I'm not going to sit here and defend that behavior, whether it's a Barca player or not. disappointing from Mapi Leon. Now I wonder how it's handled going forward with the RFEF, which you want to talk about hypocrisy in terms of doling out any punishment related to an incident like this. Yeah, right. It's exactly the RFEF. And in the same breath, this is not a defense of Mapi Leon, but let's make sure that we don't fall for that she said kind of stuff, because that's how the internet works. And especially when it comes to remarks of what was said or what didn't, sometimes the accusations wind up being the belief of the worst thing that could have been possibly said. We don't know exactly what was said. We just see with our eyes what happened. That's all we can trust. So we trust our eyes. And at this point, yes, you believe the innocence of Mapi Leon outside of that video. And while doing that and hoping that Mapi Leon didn't do something as bad as it looks like she did, well, for Kedekas, I hope that fans support her and believe her in this instance, because she doesn't deserve the treatment she's been getting online either. It's a sucky situation all around for all involved, and I'm most disappointed that at the center of it is an FC Barcelona Femení player, especially. I'm just frustrated by that. It's not the way that I wanted to end the top 5 this week, but hey, when we talk about news, not all news is good news. Sometimes there's some bad news there as well. I hope there is good news, though, in the coming week for Barcelona, where they've got 2 games plus the Copa Catalunya against Espanyol, where I wouldn't expect to see many first-teamers on Wednesday, even if that game is available for us to watch. Hopefully there is more good news, though, in the league table in the weekend, which would set Barcelona up to get another 3 points against Rayo on Monday, which I remind you, you can join me on Big Up for that watch along. And again, I hope you enjoyed another edition of Top 5. Subscribe, please. What are you waiting for? Subscribe. And as always, what's the Barca?